Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks everyone for tuning in, whoever's listening or watching. Really excited. I'm Regina Alhassan, CEO of ResearchPRO, and we're really excited to launch this project, Black Gives Back, during August 2022 to honor and celebrate Black Philanthropy Month. The Black Gives Back project is a series of conversations with other nonprofit leaders, advocates, business leaders, business executives, and other community advocates that I believe bring a really interesting voice to the space of philanthropy. And so I'm really thrilled to have my guest today, Coby C. who is founder and principal of New Reach Community Consulting. New Reach specializes in New Reach specializes in public affairs consulting services, which helps organizations get important causes connected to communities. And I'll point out that New Reach is only one of a few Black-owned certified B Corps in the entire United States. So really excited to have Coby here. Coby, welcome to Black Gives Back.
Thank you so much for having me be involved in this, Regina. It's a pleasure.
So I wanted to start this conversation, not so much with a question, but with more of an idea. And so Coby, just a little background, we've known each other for just a few years now. I did the math and I was like, no, that can't be right.
To the 10th power.
Yes, exactly. So I looked at the calendar and looked at an old flyer and was like, wow, that's that many years. And we'll just leave it there. But having known you for as long as I have and seen your work, recognize that you lend a very interesting voice to this conversation in this space. So not so much starting with a question, but with an idea. The idea that Black people don't give, Black people don't engage, they're apathetic. That's a strange idea to me because research proves otherwise. History proves otherwise. Like there's so much social change in the United States, that is a direct result of Black people engaging in something. But just that idea that Black people just don't. And so I invite you to tell a little bit more about your experience as well as respond to that idea.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question or that idea. So, my background includes grassroots community organizing. I'm a classically trained grassroots community organizer, legislative affairs, as well as being a consultant. Oftentimes those roles are kind of pitted against one another, or they're certainly on different sides of the table, but each one of those experiences are kind of what I call in my toolbox. And, so I certainly have an appreciation for, and that's where my heart is the community. Those are oftentimes the recipients of the work that I do. I do all things community touching, and that's what's near and dear to me. And yeah, those are common perceptions from primarily non-Black folks, just to be blunt, that the Black community is apathetic and aren't givers. And based on my opinion, experience, and observation, I think that's largely that opinion exists is because it's on Black folks' terms. It's something that has not been, commercialized in many ways, but it's always existed out of necessity. The Black community in particular was excluded from a lot of opportunities in society at large. So, that's how we had to get down was, to be very giving, certainly amongst our own communities, and look out for one another because the resources and the opportunities were limited. So I do think that a lot of that mentality comes from Black agency. I think is threatening for many folks in society, but the activities have certainly always existed in my mind.
Yeah, so I'm glad you kind of touched on like that discomfort with Black agency, because we had a conversation years ago, and I'm sure you don't remember this conversation, but you mentioned, and it was like, just kind of blew my mind, because I know it to be true, but when you called it out, it's like, yes. You talked about the fear that many professionals in nonprofit organizations that are serving urban communities or underserved communities, however that's defined. And oftentimes we know it's defined by skin color or zip code, which I think is problematic given like historical redlining and other factors. But you talked about the fear that many professionals have, which more than likely are white professionals in these organizations, and they're afraid of the constituents they're serving. They're afraid to go into the neighborhoods. They're afraid to go and do the assessment. They're afraid to do any type of engagement. And that struck me because I see that same fear on the philanthropy side, like on the giving side. There's just a fear of asking. So I would love for you to talk a little bit more about how that fear shows up on the administrative side.
Sure, and I talk that talk, and I'll say this on record and as a consultant. Particularly within the past 25 months, I keep track that there's been interest and engagement with Black communities in particular. I get a lot of interest from organizations who want to engage in that way. And often it's because I'm Black and they want to engage with the Black community. And, I'm very transparent. And sometimes it's, New Reach is based in Central Ohio, but does work all across the country. It's their lack of comfort with engaging with, members of the Black community within their own city. It's quite frankly lack of comfort. I'm a big believer that a lack of cultural intelligence is a big factor of that as well. So oftentimes, it could be inadvertently or otherwise, I might be a representative to give the organization cover. We're not comfortable with engaging with these communities, so we're going to send. Might be a stranger to the community. I'm an expert in the engagement process itself, and I'm comfortable in those communities. But conceptually, I'm like, hey, you should know this community more than me. They're they're 2 blocks down the street or two miles down the road, and certainly rank them up in the annual report. So conceptually, you have comfort in those communities, as I like to say, even off the clock. But unfortunately, I do think there's this largely lack of cultural intelligence, which leads into a lot of other things, but lack of comfort. And if the engagement oftentimes isn't rooted in power or privilege or profit, then there's less interest in actually doing those activities. And the nature of my work is, it goes back to my origins as grassroots community organizing, is that I'll be gone one day. That's the role of that work specifically, or as a consultant. So let's not play what I call racial Jenga, where you knock me out of my piece out and the whole thing collapses. So I oftentimes really view my work as being, in some regards, a liaison, or to begin that relationship with such communities, so that it really honors those communities and it keeps the work that the organization says it's doing honest.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned cultural intelligence. I really appreciate that language because it implies that there are some solutions. A lot of times organizations sort of shy away or stray away from these types of conversations or discussing their disconnect with the community that they serve, that they're like in the neighborhood, they don't really discuss that disconnect, but framing it around like cultural intelligence provides a sense of a solution and a pathway forward, because you can learn, like you can figure this out.
An analogy I give, somewhat tongue in cheek, is, and I've posted about this publicly, if folks can become experts and knowledgeable about Star Wars and Star Trek and Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and everything about the characters and languages and galaxies or what have you, well, how about do that for folks who aren't make-believe? How about do that for other specifically Black community and Black culture? And we've been around for way longer too, right? One of those other franchises are just a few decades old. And another analogy I give is that particularly the Black community, but just marginalized communities at large, are bicultural. And there's the difference between preferences and then just how you're forced to navigate in society. So there's Black culture and then there's dominant as white culture. We function within both, but oftentimes it's kind of like a crocodile. Crocodiles, they can function on land, they prefer to be in the water. And oftentimes I think how the Black community is engaged is purely on land, and that's because that is what's comfortable for the dominant culture. And there's limitations to that, but to fully respect, be holistic about respect and culture, it's important to recognize that, hey, we're actually bicultural. We function within a dominant society, but we have our own ways, thinking, and mentalities of doing things. It's just foreign to them because of reasons that we touched on already.
Yes, yeah. I love that idea of being bicultural. And in some ways, well, because I'm married to someone who is not American citizen by birth, that whole sense of different cultures and the merging of cultures is like, I live that every day. So I appreciate my biculturalism even more as a Black American. But I'm facing and confronting this idea that all of us, Black, white, no matter, whatever our box is, like we all have some sense of biculturalism. We are living more than one truth in the United States. And we all have layers of privilege. We all lack different types of, we're all have some privilege, but in other spaces we don't, etc. So that is really interesting to me. And I think this is an opportunity, or there is an opportunity for our Caucasian Americans, our white Americans, to embrace that sense of, no, I'm more than one identity. Like you can absolutely be who you are, like that's fine, and love yourself. But you can also recognize that other people are who they are, but together we all have like some sort of weird shared identity, as contentious as it may be sometimes. I just really like that idea of bicultural and just kind of grappling around with that and what that could look like. The other thing that comes to mind is like within philanthropy, there's this concept, that the number one rule in fundraising is make the ask. So you don't get the gift if you don't ask for it. And that's a pretty common idea in sales as well. And so on the engagement side, and that public affairs side, that community assessment side, I wonder if the asking is happening. And I think we kind of touched a little bit on that, no, it's not. But yet you hear organizations say, well, we have these community surveys, or we have these benchmark studies. And I'm always curious, who did they ask? Uh,
Yeah.
so can you talk about the asking that's happening in your realm of what I call like advancement, nonprofit outreach, whether or not it's for dollars or advocacy or constituency, etc. What's happening with the asking on your end?
Yeah, sure. So, a few of the buzzwords, as I call them, the past 25 months or so, is DE&I, equity. Folks just discovered those in the land of the free, right? And innovation. And oftentimes those get shoehorned into a lot of things, and a lot of thoughts or conversations that I'm observing is, what are innovative ways to, engage with the Black community? What's the special tool? And, I'm like, there's no bait. You're not trying to, attract a creature or what have you. A lot of it comes down to it's respect. It's respect, it's relationships, which is the nature of engagement itself. And going back to being bicultural is, that there's actually bodies of science on this, is that every culture, every major, if you will, culture is very relational in nature. One exception is European-centric or based culture. And it's not about this versus that, it's just how different cultures just tend to operate. And, within the Black culture in particular, it's relationships. Let's break bread, let's get familiar with one another, let's get comfortable with one another. It's not this overnight thing that it's going to happen because you want it to happen. And more, particularly kind of the surveying work, which I do a lot of that work, is communities want to know, okay, well, what's going to happen as a result of this? You might already have this information. What happened, the last time that you requested this of us? So it really goes back to, again, it's relationship, which I'm big on. How will the community benefit from this process? How will this process move the community forward, as opposed to just filling up a report that solely benefits a board or an organization or funders? So I think it really ties back to again, respect, engaging in a respectful way, and what's the why, and where is this going to go once this process completes. So the work that I do has been around for millennia. I'm very transparent. Yes, I have certain ways I go about doing it, but ain't nobody invent this. It's really more so about trusting the process and being respectful as you do it.
Well, you talked a little bit about like different cultures and how different cultures operate. Some are more relational than others, which made me think about, like, I recently had to do an emotional intelligence test. And so like you've probably done Strengths Finder or DISC assessment, that type of thing. And it really is no different than that. Or, well, I don't want to oversimplify things, but the idea of different people working together effectively is not different than like, okay, this group over here operates this way. And now we know that, and we can engage them around their needs, their tendencies, their inherent value, et cetera, their inherent culture, their traits. And we can do that for this group and this group and this group, the same way that we did for like a DISC assessment. Oh, now I know whenever I talk to Tom, he's this and I'm over here. So I know that if I want to hold his attention, I need to come a certain way, etc. So it could be accomplished in many of the same ways. And we have, in a lot of ways, have that same cultural, or not same, but we have that existing cultural intelligence. Like you said, we're not animals, we're not creatures, like we're not like bait, you don't need to bait us, etc. But like at the same time, our history is rich. our culture, our subcultures, the nuances of our culture. It's not like it's had the stories have not been told or that we're inaccessible.
Yes, you put the nail. That's something I push back on a lot in my work. Is not inaccessibility. We know where the Black folks are. We can get, we can get historical on this. You know where the red lines are. You know maybe the areas that you avoid. So it's not a matter of not being able to find us. To me, it really goes back to reluctance, oftentimes resistance. That's and again, it goes back to on whose terms. Oftentimes, I think if the terms are not in favor of Black agency, that's where I oftentimes see the reluctance and resistance.
Yes, that is an important distinction because it definitely calls to, like, I like to call out the fact that, a lot of these organizations are just racist. Some of the leadership is racist. Some of the board members are racist. They may be some other type of have some other isms going on too. But from my experience, as a Black woman, you're displaying racist behavior and racist policy making, decision making, etc. But we don't like to talk about that piece when we say like, oh, where is everyone? Where's the diversity? Where are the Black people? Where are the people of color? We too far often don't. Well, of course they don't. There's no one's going to call out their own shortcomings.
But that is true, and I don't even like that term. It's definitely necessary. The only reason is because no one will ever own the term, right? So the term itself doesn't have a whole lot of power. Nobody, going back to 1600s or be in this, in this land, let alone beyond, said, "Yep, I'm a racist," although their behavior clearly demonstrated that. However, I do still, unabashedly, I think that should be called out. Why do we brush our teeth every day? It's to fight gingivitis, right? Why do we not drink and drive so that we don't die behind the wheel? We're not supposed to smoke, cigarettes, tobacco, or in general because it causes cancer. But when it comes to racism, that oftentimes gets unnamed. It's the elephant in the room. It doesn't get specifically name checked, and that really does it doesn't do the work justice. Even if individuals won't own up to the behavior, you still have to call it out. I'm an 80s baby. I grew up terrified of getting gingivitis. That's when you had the animated dental commercials.
The cavity creeps.
The cavity creeps. I was terrified. Gingivitis, gingivitis. Oh no, I can't get gingivitis, right? But we don't hear that same language or energy behind systemic racism. It gets danced around. It's DE&I and equity, but yes, what is that specifically addressing? We have to call that out. We have to put a name behind it, because that those are the some solutions to it, but it still doesn't address the problem. We know why we recycle, to help sustainability. We all know about climate change and things to do with that. Those have names, but oftentimes the problem doesn't get named when it comes to race issues.
Yes. So then now I'm thinking like, so what's the campaign? What could that campaign be called? Or, I think the campaigns exist though.
They do.
Yeah.
I think they do. And it's just the Black community in particular has been marginalized and terrorized for generations that there's so much work to do. It's not that the work hasn't been done. It's just some of it's fragmented by design. We didn't design it that way, and every effort that we do matters so much. So it comes down to finite time, energy, and resources, you know, all of those are just, it's a quagmire that is the position that we've been placed in. I do think the work is being done. It's just way more nuanced because of the history of our community.
Mhm. So I want to kind of pivot just a little bit and take a more personal approach, because yes, we do have we come from a culture of relationships, community, generosity, philanthropy. So I'm on this quest to find a traditional, like a African word, or a word from an African culture that expresses the same thing that philanthropy does, because that's a Greek word. You know, it's not our word, but yet the trait is ours. But I don't want to get off. I could go off on a tangent on that. But given the fact that that is an inherent quality to Black people, I think it's interesting that, like, the way that that shows up in our everyday lives. So for me, it definitely drives the work that I do. And I think it drives the work that you do. So I'm curious about that. And with that, would also love to hear about, like, your introduction to generosity and giving and how that may show up for you today.
Oh wow! So I'll start with the last question first. I'm from I guess the term now is a challenged neighborhood. I'm from the hood. That's translation. But very proudly, I would like to say some folks run from it, some folks lie about it. I receive, just as oftentimes, if folks are from the country, that gets romanticized. If folks are from the big city, that gets romanticized. The suburbs, every environment gets romanticized, except for what we call the hood. And the hood has a lot of beauty that is in there. Again, it's a victim in a lot of ways of other society or history. My sense of relationships, my sense of looking out for others. All we got is all we got. It's kind of a common principle. Pooled resources, be it lunch money, be it rent money, be it getting the car fixed, getting a car. All of those are examples of kind of trauma on one side, but also understanding the value of and the power of people and those communities at large. So that's really my probably my introduction to it, is just seeing it in a real way, where that person, that $5 or $10 wasn't just throwaway money. That was a decision point that it might have been in a position, or myself, to contribute to someone else to help help them out. So in a very, very real sense, that's, I guess, kind of my introduction to it.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but you made me think of something like this idea, like that's survival philanthropy, and then like how maybe that's just not as sexy, And so we talk about like the glorification of, like, well, I'm from the suburbs, I'm from here, I'm from there, but for some reason, because it's out of the hood, it's out of necessity, it's out of survival in some ways, it gets discounted.
It really does. And, I have life skills from being in that environment. I can figure stuff out. So I guess it's two sides of the same coin. Whereas I've seen this as witnesses of, someone maybe who happens to be completely from the suburbs, and their car's a flat tire, and that's just the end of their week. And I'm thinking, okay, the bus route runs here, but like, you just figure it out of necessity. Yeah. So oftentimes, what I think does not get appreciated from people who might be from or live in those environments, their life skills more than likely trump, other people's. A lot of the first entrepreneurs who I got exposed to were from those communities, and particularly, oftentimes those were the avenues that we were limited to, but entertainers, many of them, whether it's sports, music, or what have you, don't have MBAs, but they're more savvy than folks who might have those because they have those life skills, where they just, maybe didn't have as access. They weren't permitted to go behind the door. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of talent, skills, and worth happening in those communities. They just don't get talked about in that way. And as a slight tangent, I think it's because it's less profitable to do that. Those communities were intentionally depowered. So if you really enhance that, you can't make, the great philosopher Chris Rock says, "Ain't no money in the cure," right? So if those communities are empowered, you can't make money off of their back, at least directly, which absolutely does happen in the philanthropy world. I'm very vocal against that. Is poverty pimping is one way I just describe it. But let's not brag about how much money was raised on the backs of those people. Let's brag about how much difference was made and what were the outcomes made from that work.
Yeah, that's an important point. So to kind of go back to the other part of the question, yes, I agree that life skills comes out of that, and some other life skills, I guess. But I think another thing that comes out of that then would be the compassion and the relationships, or the skills, the ability to grow relationships, meaningful relationships. And then kind of going back to, for you, how does that show up in the work that you do?
Yeah,
and as
good.
a B Corp. So like you're not, so we're all here as entrepreneurs, we're here, obviously we have a bottom line, but you were intentional about your designation. So again, just like that compassion and that spirit of generosity continuing to show up in your current life.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And for folks who might be less familiar, B Corp certification is basically the gold standard for demonstrated social impact. It's awarded by an international nonprofit called B Labs to businesses who have demonstrated social and environmental impact. And, it really spoke to me because it's really how I always really go about my work is, not, just activities and not just outputs, but more towards the outcomes and impact. And, my work is guided by my just personal philosophy is what is needed, what's necessary to put individuals, communities, and organizations on a path towards actual outcomes and impact. So not just, say counting belly buttons. There's merit to that, but in my work, that's a means to an end. So we know there's X amount of people who are experiencing this condition or this situation or what have you, and then what? Okay, so that's identifying the people, but how do we kind of really identify solutions and methods to really put them in a better position? That's how I go about my work. It can and does, rock the boat, but I own that, and I'm actually, proud of that. I'm not a status quo person. I think that, oftentimes individuals, just historically, who they get lionized in hindsight, right? They wasn't a fan favorite when they were alive. Oftentimes they were taken from us prematurely because they did rock the boat. So, for me, it ain't no glory in it. Plenty of war wounds and tomato stains from getting heckled. And there's rooms and opportunities that I don't and won't get invited to, and I look at it as that means we're on the same page. That's not an insult. I don't. I'm not driven to be chosen. You know, I don't know if
Yeah.
there's still a term out there, but I don't have pick-meism. And also, it's not to be provocative for the sake of being provocative. I'm a extremely logical person. It's, well, if this is going to make a difference, why don't we do this?
Yeah.
You know, if this is going to put us on a path to, not needing to do this again, why don't we do that? And that's just the spirit of New Reach, because that's my spirit. You know, I don't know how to where I'm from, people, back to survival skills, see through. You know, if I were to ever make a statement otherwise, there'd be 500 people online emailing me, texting me, because that ain't really Coby. So, how I go about my work is quite literally driven by who and how I am, and just proud to have the receipts behind that. But yeah, there's no glory in doing that. I do it because it's necessary.
Yeah. And so you kind of touch on for me, the impetus behind this series. So like the whole idea of like, I'm not new to this, we're true to this, this is not a new thing for us. And sometimes I have to admit, sometimes I have to log off and like just close down LinkedIn because I see like DEI, equity, etc. I see inclusion being used as more of a fad, more as a badge of honor. People are having conversations. I'm like, that's not a real honest conversation.
Yeah. Or just it's simply social justice. I go back to that's what we were really talking about the last lines in the Pledge of Allegiance. We're talking about the 14th Amendment. So why are y'all patting yourself on the backs for something that, I'm right there with you. I think the conversations are only good because a lot more Black people, especially in predominantly white environments, feel more empowered to be vocal. That I do see the merit in that. I love it on LinkedIn. Sisters or the profile pictures and the natural hair. I love the pushback, the comments. So that I think has value. But yeah, outside of that, a lot of it is just lip service and marketing.
Yes. So I kind of reached a point where like, if there's going to be a conversation, I at least like, you've known me long enough. There are some out there that don't know, like, I'm really like a Black nationalist.
Yes.
If you want to know the truth, it's all about the red, black, and green all day, every day. I got my Black unicorn mug because it's all Black, all everything.
And why not? Because we get plenty of the other, right?
Right, because I love myself, because there's no representation matters, right? And so it doesn't matter with anywhere else more than it matters within my own self. So, like, I have to love myself, and that has nothing to do with anyone else. Like, no one else even enters the sphere when it comes to how do I honor my own physical being, and then on top, deeper than that, my own spiritual being. So it's not new. We have the receipts, and again, really, really interested in creating space for some more authentic conversations. And hopefully like this will just be a start. I don't know where this project will take us, but for August, as we celebrate Black Philanthropy Month, wanted to make sure that I was creating space for voices that had been in it, like you mentioned, like for a long time. It's not, our businesses may be young, but we've been in these games for our entire careers, and we kind of danced around the numbers, but we're talking about a couple of decades or more.
It didn't just pop up when when white folks said it was okay. And
right.
I saw a meme online a few months ago, and the gist of it is, how many reputations have you saved by being quiet? And it's like, folks are getting these magazine covers and editorial opportunities, and it's like, y'all are, you know, I'm not bashfully Black. And to your point,
Yes.
you know, and even some of our folks who might, you know, kind of showed up once the smoke died down. And there might be different reasons for that, but to your point, that ain't us. You know, it wasn't timing it like you're jumping into double dutch. It's like, no, we was already caught up in the ropes.
Yes, yes. Come see me in 90s, you know,
Yes.
early 2000s, and,
Yes.
you know, but really doing that work on the ground, you know, doing that face to face, person to person, community engagement, community mobilization, community assessment, and having a real true sense of who and what is going on, who and what the dynamics are of the variety of Black communities, what the economic realities are. You know, yes, some of us are, you know, some of us don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of assets, but that's not the reality for all of us. You know, some of us don't have education or haven't been to college, but that's not true for all of us. So you know, just really the variety of Black communities, and wanting to be a voice and make space and advocate for those people, no matter where they are, who they are, what their needs and priorities may be. You know, all of us are not food insecure, but we still need some representation somewhere else, you know. So yeah, just wanting to call that out, and I think that's important. And another reason why I was really driven that this dialogue series needs to belong to a Black organization, or you know, and so you talked about individual employees having permission to show up more strong, more unapologetically Black, and that's wonderful. But still, then those conversations oftentimes belong to the predominantly white organization, which is problematic, given the history and the power dynamics. So we're really, again, driven and determined to create a Black-owned space, you know, with Black voices, for the purpose of serving Black people. And so if other people tune into this, that's awesome, and certainly want them to, invite them to. But if they don't necessarily see themselves in this, or see themselves centered in this, then I've done my job. Like,
yeah, yeah. And I really love it because it's back to, you know, being Black or Black folks or Black things on our own terms. And, you know, if folks are resentful of that, for one, it's kind of, well, so what, right? Like that's agency there. But quite literally, systems were literally not designed for us. So it's really, you know, whether you talk about culturally or systemically, it's putting, you know, it doesn't match. Those pieces, they weren't designed to match, they weren't intended to match, and or there's, again, resistance or reluctance to even explore that. And, you know, one thing that comes to mind, you know, with you know, kind of engagement work, I've had aha moments. You know, it's very relational work, right? And our culture is very relational. Other cultures are way more transactional. So even a lot of the measures, and maybe even in philanthropy, that get applied, they try to get applied don't match, right? So it's, you know, things that might get applied to widgets and products, and, you know, the obsession with metrics down into the weeds and KPIs, and all of those, they have their place, but they are always very culturally, I wouldn't say sensitive. They just don't, they're just irrelevant culturally and or the nature of the work. I do engagement work, right? A lot of it is qualitative, and you know, the nature of my work is relational. A lot of the communities I work with is relational. A lot of metrics just don't matter or make sense. It, you know, if I'm, making sense, it's, when we have our own space, we can have our own terms to do what needs to be done in a way that's meaningful and respectful.
Yeah. I'm so glad you called that out. So as a prospect development professional, I'm all about the metrics. It's all about the donor and wealth analysis and, metrics driven fundraising, or at least metric driven analysis. And so oftentimes, and there will be some subsequent conversations with other prospect development professionals. And I want to dig into that with them. The metrics just don't make sense. Like, yes, it makes sense over here, but for some of these other groups, those metrics just don't apply. It just let it go.
I have been encouraged, and I've heard this from, members and representatives of the community, particularly with, grassroots groups who may or may not be a 501c3, but the sources aren't getting, policed as much. Whereas, where's every single penny going, and prove that that penny made a difference. So basically trusting that people know their community. There's a lot of people who have been doing the work for generations, be it individual or organization, but again, metrics do have a place, but if that's getting in the way of the work being done, and if it's just flat out disrespectful, then that just doesn't do a whole lot of good. So I have been encouraged by seeing a little bit more of, hey, here's some resources. We're not going to have you fill out a 20-page report every month how every penny was spent. Yes, there's parameters around it, but it's not you're not being overzealous with basically you're trusting Black folks in their community to do the work, again, oftentimes who have been doing it for generations.
Yeah, and then having to call out like, you mistrust us, or you mistrust them because they're Black.
Yeah.
And like, if you can call that out and recognize that's the real issue. Oh, okay. Now let's move past that.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I have definitely enjoyed this conversation. I feel like we could go in lots of other different directions. So I definitely, seeing where this project goes, there may be an opportunity for us to pick this conversation up again. But I really appreciate your time. Really grateful for you honoring us with your insights and your experiences. So any other like closing comments or final thoughts or questions or call to actions you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, just and thank you for the invitation to be involved in this conversation and in this effort. Thank you for all that you do, not just under with your ResearchPRO hat on, but outside of that and prior to that. And my call to action would just be just be Black out loud, not be bashfully Black. It's to your point. It's not a way I necessarily thought of it, but it's true. That's who you are. That's what you are. You don't owe anyone an apology for that, and certainly to look out for your family, your community. So that's all I got.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to the next conversation. I hope that you will come back and check out the next dialogue in the series, Black Gives Back. Thank you so much, Coby.
Sure.